How we doing? Yeah. Right. Set to go. The work session of the Annapolis City Council for Wednesday, July 15th, 2021 will be called to order at 3:02. At this time, would everyone willing and able please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is ID 16221, update on election procedures.
Could we please come forward from the election board? Thank you so much for all the hard work that you are doing for us. Thank you. Yeah, please.
All right, good afternoon. It's nice to see everybody in person without masks. All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to update you on the Board of Supervisors of Elections plans for the 2021 elections. Specifically, I want to go over the mail-in ballot process, in-person voting, canvassing, and some other aspects of the elections. To begin, I always like to state that the board's charge is to conduct safe, secure, and accessible elections for Annapolis voters, ensure voters' rights to vote, and prepare for the city's two elections that occur every 4 years. Brianna Cuffey and myself are the current board members. Cliff Myers, who served on the board for 7 years, recently moved out of the city and is no longer on the board. But we really want to thank him for his dedication and commitment to voter integrity and his contributions to the current 2021 elections. We're looking forward to a new member joining us, and we will certainly welcome them and bring them up to speed quickly. We're ably supported by Regina Watkins Eldridge, City Clerk, Susan Eckert, the Election Administration Assistant, and Ashley Leonard of the Office of Law. In addition, Joe Torrey and David Garris with the Anne Arundel County State Board of Elections have been great and working diligently with us. And I asked them to be here today to answer the questions I can't or correct me if I have something wrong, because there's been a lot going on lately. To give you some background, that we initially looked at mail-in voting prior to COVID-19, partly because Rockville had done it successfully along with some other jurisdictions, and it's been shown to make voting more accessible, convenient, and increases voter turnout. With the possibility that COVID-19 might continue to be a factor for the upcoming city elections, we started looking at it more closely in 2020 and even in 2021. As you all, I can imagine with your planning also, you have to keep it in mind and hoping for the best. Maryland utilized mail-in voting in both the 2020 primary and general elections. For the primary election, all eligible Maryland voters were automatically mailed a ballot that, when completed, could be mailed in or deposited in a drop box. They also had the option to vote in person. This is the mail-in voting process that will be used in Annapolis this year. For the general election, all eligible voters were automatically mailed absentee ballot applications that they could complete and return if they wanted to receive a ballot. Completed ballots could be mailed, deposited in a drop box, and then again in person was available. In June of 2020, City Council approved Resolution 3520, which included vote by mail as an option for the 2021 municipal elections. In December 2020, the board unanimously voted to have eligible voters receive absentee ballot applications if they wanted to receive a ballot. That would have been the type that was used in the general election. When I met with you in March of 2021 at a work session to discuss the elections, that was the plan. However, during April and May, in discussion with the Anne Arundel County State Board of Elections, it became obvious to us that the amount of time between the Annapolis primary election and the general election was not sufficient for absentee ballot applications to be mailed to voters, completed by voters, returned for processing, ballots mailed out, and then completed ballots returned. So there was a lot of mailings going back and forth. Therefore, at the May 18th, 2021 board meeting, members voted to change the process and have all eligible Annapolis voters receive ballots that could be mailed in or deposited in drop boxes, along with the option to vote in person, their preference. The Anne Arundel County State Board of Elections has been supportive of this decision and has been working diligently with us to assure the safety and security of these elections. Having up-to-date addresses for registered voters is essential for the timely and accurate delivery of ballots, and we've been working with Mitchell Stevenson to come up with a communication plan to really encourage voters to understand the process, but also to look and check their addresses and make sure that they're up to date. If a ballot is, actually I'm going to skip this and may have Joe go through that. We realize that addresses is really critical. I did ask Joe and David today what the return rate has been for the recent voter notification mailing that went out, and it looks to be about 1.9%, which, if I have my numbers correct, sometimes it can be as high as 8 to 10%. So 1.9 that are coming back then gives us the opportunity to contact or try to contact people and get the correct addresses. Joe, if you don't mind going over a little bit about the delivery of ballots as far as what happens with undeliverables.
Okay, with the return voter notification cards. Sure. So when the cards come back, most of, let me turn that on. We have return service requested on the cards, so we get them back. They're not forwarded. So what happens, we'll get a yellow sticker from the post office that says that they moved and we have a new address. And when we get one that has a new address on it, then we can, if they're in Annapolis, we change their address. The law says we can change their address in our records. And if they moved out of the city of Annapolis, we notify them and try to do, we actually forward it to the other local board if they moved out to another county. So as Eileen said, I have a 1.52%, almost 2%. We mailed out 26,521 cards. Out of those, we had 69 that we didn't have no name on deliverables. So those we can't do anything with. We don't know where they are or what they've done. So they're still active registered voters in Annapolis because we need a signature from them to take them off of our records. So we don't know where they are, 69. So the total was 402 cards returned. And generally, as Eileen said, we have an 8 to 10% return rate. When we send out specimen ballots right before election, we have 425,000 registered voters in the county. So we get 42,000 pieces of mail back where we have to try to find the voters. So, have any questions?
Any questions thus far?
Alderman Finlayson and Alderman Perrin.
Yes, thank you. Is there an effort, if a ballot is mailed and it's received by the wrong party, and I don't mean party as in political party, but a different person, what's the process to make sure that person doesn't take that ballot and use it for a vote?
Well, we put return service requested on the ballots too. So if it's undeliverable, it comes back to our office. And right now we just checked the address, so we'll go back and look and we'll see if they moved and we'll try to contact them. So to answer your question though is usually if someone in a household receives a ballot, they didn't tell us that the person moved. Mm-hmm. So their son or daughter went to college, they're still taking the mail, so they have it there. So usually we'll get a phone call and say, the person will call and say they've moved so we can get something from the daughter or the son and have them removed. But that ballot, we ask them to bring it back or drop it off. If they vote the ballot and turn it in, we don't hear from them, well,
I guess
voted.
that's the concern, that they
Yeah,
could potentially
it's
vote.
but that doesn't happen.
Okay,
It doesn't happen. It didn't happen in the presidential election when we mailed out over 400,000. It just doesn't happen. You know, there's fraud. We've asked people when they confront us with fraud, prove it, and they can't prove it.
I did read the letter that accompanied our new cards, and it indicated that you look for a signature. And I think that's what I was trying to get to. Do you actually compare signatures? We have to sign the back of the envelope, correct?
Yes,
And then,
right. There's an oath on the back of the envelope. Right now, we don't have the technology for signature verification. That's done by computers these days. So I've been doing this for 34 years, worked at headquarters for 20. And the FBI would say, listen, you're not a signature verification. You're not trained in signatures. So there are tools now, and the state board's looking into that for all the 24 jurisdictions. They're going to report back to the legislature right before they go in. And we actually have a meeting the end of this month with 3 companies that do have signature verification, and we'll be looking at that just for Anne Arundel County.
and if there is no signature, if they don't take the oath and they just send it back, what happens to the ballot?
If there's no signature on the envelope, that we can't count the ballot. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the same process that we did for the presidential election. We're going to call that person and tell them, hey, you didn't sign the oath, you forgot to sign it. Either come into the office and sign it, or we can email, we can scan in the back of the envelope, email it to them, have them sign it, and email it back to us.
Great.
But we call that curing. We'll do that.
Okay,
Because
wonderful.
we want every vote to count, and that's what we did in 2020.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to make an announcement. Alderman Pound is next. He just signaled me, and I've been texted by Brooks from the Capitol, a guilty verdict in the Ramos case. So he will spend the rest of his life in prison, which is good news for this city. Thank you. Alderman Pound?
Thank you. My question is somewhat... It is now. Some of us need that more than others. My question is along the same lines as my colleague from Ward 4. I've got concerns that dead people may not be acknowledged by the residents of a house. I mean, my mother-in-law passes away when she's living with us, and, you know, I just see her name on something, and without reading it, and then go to the polls, and lo and behold, my mother-in-law, you know, ends up with a ballot. I know that's not supposed to happen, and you say it doesn't happen. What guarantees do we have? I mean, in the last election, I sent out and requested a return of service. I had the voting list that you folks had, pretty up to date, and when I sent out cards, I got probably 15 to 20% of them back. I got almost nothing from the post office saying these folks had moved, or here's a new address. Got a few of those, didn't get very many. I don't know, what guarantees do you offer here?
There's no guarantee unless we're notified by a sibling of the deceased. If you say your mom or your dad passed away, unless we're notified verbally, or they call us. But there's another way that we get information on deceased folks, and the Maryland is part of the Registration Information Center. And we get information from 34 states. We get the information from the motor vehicles, their addresses. We get the death notices from those states. And we also get information from the local boards, if anyone's moved with the local boards. So every quarter, we get approximately 36 to 50,000 records in our office that may belong to Maryland. And then what the state board does, they parse those out to the 24 jurisdictions. So we get a list for Anne Arundel County, and then we start scrubbing that list and look at our voter registration list. Because our goal is to have 100% accuracy on our voter registration rolls. That's something that we do every day. You know, we get questions, what do you do every 2 years? There's an election every 2 years. Well, what do you do between that time? What do you do? You take off, the state still pays you? No. We're massaging records every day. You know, we get records from the Motor Vehicle Administration. That's where you can change your address and register. We get records from there every day. There's designated agencies, the health department, where people go to get assistance. We get records from there because people register there, and we get those records. So we get approximately anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 records a day that we're actually looking at, and try to keep our rolls clean. That's the most elections. We are professional project managers. There's no rain dates for election day. And the worst thing that Joe Torre can do is send ballots out to people that not supposed to have them. But it happens because we don't know that they moved. We don't know that they passed away. Even though we have all these tools in our toolbox that we use, there's still some that slip by. But it's not at 425,000.
Okay.
It's not it's not 100,000. It's below the 10,000 that we get.
All right, so you're not standing in front of St. Mary's Cemetery handing out ballots and
No.
dropping them?
No,
Okay.
no.
I got you.
Did your mother or mother-in-law get a voter?
I'm sorry?
Voter notification card?
Did your mother or mother-in-law who has passed away, did they get a voter notification card recently?
I'm having trouble understanding you because,
There was a mailing that went out recently.
yes.
So did someone who had been in your residence who has passed away, did they receive that?
No.
So that means that they're off the rolls.
Yep.
Even if, again, it's the voters' and families' responsibility to keep that up to date. But as Joe has outlined, there's lots of ways to do that. And if someone gets a ballot and they don't return it, I mean, voter fraud occurs when someone signs it and actually casts that ballot for somebody else.
Excuse me, I want to say this. When we do find that someone voted twice, and sometimes in an election we might have 1, 2, 5, and we can verify that because they came in and signed the voter authority cards, we have a signature. We turn it over to the special state prosecutor and they go after them. They do that in all 24 jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We're not sure whether Alderman Pound's mother-in-law would have voted for him. If she...
She was a Democrat.
So I'll just, again, briefly go over, I know you've heard some of this before, but briefly want to go over
I think Alderman Tierney
I'm sorry.
just want to have
Oh,
one
I'm
more
sorry.
question.
Yeah,
while
no,
you're-
I just wanted to relieve any doubt, and I just wanted to walk that through about dead people voting. I just wanted to walk that through because I think what I hear you saying that you could say that correct me if I'm wrong, a person gets a voter that, do you live there? Are you alive or whatever? And they have to return it. I mean, that's the key thing, right?
A voter notification
Yeah.
card? No, they don't have to return it. That's why we put
Oh, I mean,
return
they
service
return-
requested on it, so we get it back if it's undeliverable.
That's
They
what
don't
I
live
meant.
there to post.
That's what I
They put
meant.
in a change of address at the post office. They
So,
put a yellow
so
sticker
the
on it,
checks
get
and
that.
balances happen before you issue those, really, to see if a person's alive or not. And so, okay, so with Fred's example of, say she did get one, but even if that person, if there's a fraudulent ballot, don't you have a way of matching the signature to the submitted signature or something? I mean,
No,
I just-
I
think-
don't.
I just want to kill the rumor about dead people voting, that's all.
I'm 70 years old and my signature has changed a few times.
Yeah, okay.
So what's on record when they turned 18 and when I registered at 18 and what
Yeah.
is now, it's
Yeah.
quite different.
Okay,
But the signature verification tools that they have out there now can decipher that.
yeah,
So I think that's what the state's going to move towards, to have signature verification. Because vote by mail is going to be more and more as we move forward in elections, because we can't find election judges to work.
I know.
And in Anne Arundel, in our office, we need 3,500 election judges for 207 locations and 3,500 people. We use the voter registration list to go through there to hunt them down. We send out letters asking them to become judges. And during the pandemic, we had all of our polling places full while we were rolling up to the primary in December. And then the election judges were calling, saying, I'm not working. So that's why we had to do, we went down to 34 locations out of 207. And we were lucky to find the judges that worked there. And guess what? Some of them did catch COVID on election day. And we trained them to call in so we can contact trace the rest of the folks that you worked with. And we had about 7 people that did contact it that day, so.
Just also somewhat to your point, again, going back to the communication plan, we're going to be encouraging people, not only update your addresses, but again, if there's someone in your household that has passed away, has moved, please get them to update it. We're also encouraging people to register to vote. Our city code does not allow for same-day voter registration. So we want to get people to get registered, and we are going to be getting some of that out frequently. Eligible voters will automatically be mailed their ballots. I think right now the dates that are slated in the election calendar is August 30th for the primary election and October 8th for the general election. Voters can then choose one of 3 ways to return their ballots. The mail-in, which can be mailed in, is going to have return postage paid by the city for that to ensure that they do get through the postal service. If they don't use the postal service, the city's not paying for it. It's if they get it returned through that method. So they can also put it in a drop box at any of the polling locations. So if someone lives in Ward 3 and they work downtown, they can drop it into the Ward 1 polling, the drop box. It can go to anyone. Those drop boxes the ballots will be picked up twice a day by a bipartisan trained staff from the County State Board of Elections. And there is a lot of procedures that go into making sure that there's, control and custody of those ballots. Mail-in ballots and ballots that are, mail-in ballots, going back to that, need to be submitted or postmarked by Election Day and received by the board by 10 a.m. on the Tuesday after each election. This year, because the code says that we can't begin opening envelopes and counting ballots until after the election, the canvass we had requested you all to pass so that we could start the canvass the day after on Wednesday. So all of the ballots that have come in from mail-in ballots, mail-in and the drop boxes will start to be counted on that Wednesday. And they will continue to be counted till they're all in. Then the following Tuesday, we will make sure that any that have been postmarked and have come in, postmarked by the election day, but have come in by the start of canvass on that day at 10 a.m. will be included. And then the final official totals will be put out. This will be a difference for you all who are candidates that are used to having your workers go to the polling locations and get those pieces of paper off of the wall. You will have some unofficial ballot, an unofficial count that evening, but it will be based on who voted in person. Okay, so that will draw the whole process out a little bit. But again, we want to do this correctly and we want to do it, take our time.
Just have, Alderman Gay had a question. That's okay.
Oh, I was just going to interject saying, I think we passed that bill Monday, didn't we?
I believe so,
By
too,
canvass
yeah.
saying it was passed, yeah. Sorry.
Alderman Gay?
I just have 1 or 2 quick questions. I'm more confused about the voting process than I've ever been now. So the state of Maryland has same-day voter registration, but the city of Annapolis does not.
Correct.
So in the attempts to, make this, I guess, a more accessible election, was that not a recommendation from the committee to the council?
It wasn't at the time for a number of reasons. First, it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say needed. I think the biggest challenge is the technology. Because the state has it doesn't mean that it can be used at a municipal level. So that would mean if we go by what we had to do with the campaign fund reports when we looked into technology and piggybacking onto the state system, even trying to piggyback on the system, it was going to be like $300,000. So we didn't pursue it. We didn't pursue some other technology applications at the municipal level because of cost, and that same-day voter registration was viewed pretty much in the same light. It's not available to us at this point, and probably not cost-effective.
Okay.
And I believe I went back, and I don't have the number, but I can look it up. I believe when we met in our work session, you asked a similar question. I believe I went back to look to see how many people did register same day in the city of Annapolis for the last elections, and it was minimal.
It's minimal.
Minimal.
But we get every election, but there are folks that do that.
So it certainly could be something looking into the future, and we can, include that in a cost analysis.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. And then you also mentioned and I believe you mentioned this previously in the last meeting, and just for clarification again, the canvassing starts the Wednesday after the election. So what will be received the Tuesday night of the election will only be early votes and votes that have been previously mailed in.
Right. I mean, yeah, everything that comes in before Election Day is held until after Election Day to be counted.
Right, it'll be everybody that showed up in person at your 8 polling places.
So if
We'll
I
report
mail in my ballot 2 days before the election, and or just because the mail's slow, I'll say 4 days before the election, and you get it the day before the election, would you count my ballot, or would you wait until after the election to count my ballot?
Wait until after the election. It'll be counted, it's just that city code prohibits us from opening ballots before Election Day. So as long as it's postmarked by Election Day and received by the board by the 10 a.m. the Tuesday after Election Day, it will be counted.
And so because we are pushing out this, I mean, we're mailing everybody ballots at this point, and I'm not sure what the cost of that, but we are expecting, or at least I'm assuming we're expecting a significantly low in-person voter turnout. So the votes that we likely will receive the day of the election will be, I mean, it pretty much we won't have a clear answer of any, unless it's a landslide. You won't have any real understanding of who won any race for days after.
We'll have a different type of unofficial results.
Okay.
Now, the way the races are currently looking, there's a lot of people that are unopposed. So,
And so I think previously you mentioned too, and I'm just again clarifying here, there was a staffing issue. That's the reason that you couldn't start counting them the day of.
it's in city code that says we cannot begin counting until after the election,
Okay, so it has to
after
be
the
the whole
polling
day.
locations close.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in code. So,
Alderman Savage?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, just a couple of questions, and thank you to all of you for everything you've done to support our elections. And I do think this is a good move in terms of mailing the ballots. So I guess, so one question would be, well, and maybe we do need to talk to the state about seeing if they can actually assist us in municipalities in same-day registration, but also with piggybacking on the campaign finance system, because I think those do seem like prohibitive costs to us, and I'm sure we're not the only municipality who is potentially facing that cost. So I think we should at least make them aware, the state aware.
I think if you were to talk to Joe and David, they would encourage you to think about syncing us in with the presidential or the state elections to take care of that.
Be no cost to the city of Annapolis. The state will put it on. You'll have same-day registration. You'll do your filing at the State Board of Elections.
I mean, there's a lot of things in code that I know the Board of Elections would like to see brought into the 21st century, and especially now that we've had the positive experience with the county, to really start integrating that.
And that might be I'm sure that's something that the Charter Review Commission might be bringing up as well. So yeah, that's certainly something we could talk about in the future. So regarding going back to the dead people, so with
There seems to be a fascination with it.
so just to understand the process,
I think we should post outside of the funeral homes, maybe.
when somebody dies, a death notice is sent out by who would send that out?
It's it's DHMA's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. We get those notices every week.
So whenever
Electronically.
somebody's, I don't know how it works, is certified as dying or confirmed as dead, a notice gets sent out and you update your roles and that kind of thing. And did you know is there often a delay between somebody dying and you receiving that notice?
No, we get them every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Every 2 weeks, whoever passed away in the state of Maryland. Now, I have to tell you this, if you pass away in Florida, we don't know, because there's no reciprocity between most states.
Okay.
Unless they belong to ERIC, Electronic Registration Information Center. Then we'll get that if a Maryland resident dies in Florida, just to let you know a little bit more of the process.
I always knew Florida was kind of the black hole. But, all right.
He's worried he can't win without the cemetery vote this time.
So how will duplicative voting be prevented?
How will?
How will somebody be prevented from voting? So if somebody submits their mail-in ballot and then goes in person
Yeah.
to vote,
Maybe
so
you could go through that
okay.
process.
what process is in place to?
Okay, so once we mail out the ballots and we start receiving them, the ballots are going to be received in a post office box here in Annapolis. It has an Annapolis address. I'll go by and pick up, our office will go by and pick up those ballots, and we'll take them back to the office. What we'll do, we'll organize those ballots. We'll start checking them in. They'll have a barcode on the outside of it. So we'll start checking them into our voter registration system every day as we receive them. We'll pick up twice a day. And then what we'll do, once they're checked into the system, that makes a record that we mailed you a ballot and now we received your ballot. And then we have another count where it's counted once we canvass it.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 days before Election Day, we're going to, any ballots that are received before Election Day, 10 days before, that's the cutoff for our electronic poll books. That's our check-in devices. So any ballots we receive at that time, we hold those ballots after that date, because we did the cutoff date. We have all our voters now that didn't send in a mailed-in ballot, and they may show up on Election Day. So those ballots are held until after Election Day. So when we canvass those ballots on the Wednesday afterwards, we'll be canvassing the ballots that we picked up before Election Day. So what happens in the precinct when the person comes in to vote, if you voted a mail-in ballot, we're going to know on our electronic poll book that you did. And if they say, well, I didn't do it, or we don't argue with any voter now in a precinct. So they vote a provisional ballot. Now, provisional ballot is actually a voter registration application, and they get a ballot, they stick it in the envelope, it's sealed, and then we get that back. And when we get that back in our office the day after Election Day on Wednesday, we'll start checking those to see if we received it in the system. And then we'll double check. We'll go back to where we have them organized. We put them in batches of 25, and we have a batch number. We'll go back to that batch and actually make sure we have a ballot for that person. So those are the check and balances for Election Day and receiving mailed-in ballots.
Okay. And so since everybody's getting mailed a ballot, there's really no absentee ballots if somebody...
No, there still is,
There still will
because
be some.
somebody would call in and say, hey, I know there's an election and I'm going to be out of town. So then we have them fill out an application with the address that they want it mailed to. So we still have some applications. Do you recall how many we received?
We've already had a couple I know that Regina has forwarded that said they're not going to be in town when the ballots come.
Okay, and are those numbers going to be, because I guess those were kind of presented somewhere, right? The total number of absentee ballots received?
No, they're all commingled with the
Okay.
mail-in.
Okay. Okay, and so ballots aren't actively verified in terms of the signatures, right? That's just because we don't have the technology. But how does the actual, because when you vote in person, you have poll watchers who can kind of challenge. How does the challenge work? Is there a challenge? Because what I'm asking, because I kind of want to know if there can be challenged and if there are limitations on.
Sure.
Challenging ballots.
When we canvass the ballots the day after, we do canvasses after our election, when we're running in regular elections. So we have challengers and watchers there. We have parties there that watch how we open the ballot, and some of them even make tick marks. They're allowed to stand right behind our canvassers. So yeah, there's a way to challenge a ballot during that day.
What kind of limitations are placed on that? Just
No limitations.
so somebody could challenge every single ballot and.
Doesn't happen.
Okay.
We have very few challenges when we get into a canvass.
They're also in bipartisan teams. Also, I think Alderman Payon, you came to the canvass for the 2017 elections. I think maybe Alderman Finlayson, you may have been there, but
It's because I won by so many votes.
Yeah, we'll have 25 teams of election judges. So we'll have 50 election judges there that will cherry pick because we know they're good people. They've run a canvass for us before, and we'll have 25 teams, 50 people there at the tables, and we'll have the ballots organized by then. We can count up to 10,000 ballots a day on our high-speed scanner. So you have a potential of 26,000. Approximately, you have 26,500 registered voters here. So we'll be able to, if we don't, we like to try to finish in one day, so maybe we can get whatever we received on Wednesday. If not, we'll reconvene on Thursday and finish, and then the following Monday, we'll look for the ones that are postmarked, came in the mail, and they qualify, so we'll do those on Monday. So we'll have the final count on Monday. So we'll have the totals that were the people that voted in person on election night. And as we finish with the canvasses, we'll commingle those results, and they're all still unofficial until the Monday after we
the
certify.
Tuesday after.
Yeah,
Tuesday after.
Yeah, so those will still give you totals. We'll give you the candidates' totals. We'll let you know how many ballots are still out that we haven't received because we have a count. So you'll know, if you won by 26 and we still have, there's 10 left to come in, example, you won the race.
Okay.
We'll give you all those numbers at the canvas. You'll know.
Okay. Well, good. Yeah, I was kind of asking because I want to make sure Alderman Payon can't come to Ward 7 and challenge everybody as being a dead voter. But
Yep.
I'm not sure you have a cemetery in your ward.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Alderman Payne?
Thank you, sir. Actually, I'm a little confused as to when the canvassing starts. I know I think there were 3 of us that were present 4 years ago at the canvassing, and that was actually, I believe it was a week after the election, or close to it. Now, as I understand it, that will be the next day. I don't understand why you would, is that a misunderstanding on my part?
Well, it's because of the number of mail-in ballots that we're going to be getting. So we don't want to wait until the Tuesday after to start counting. So we've moved it up to Wednesday. So all of the ballots that come in through the U.S. mail, all the ballots that have come in through the drop boxes will start being counted on that Wednesday.
Okay, what if a ballot comes in Thursday, Friday, and it is postmarked appropriately?
It will be counted. The deadline is 10 a.m. the Tuesday after the election.
Okay.
That's the date that you're used to being the canvass. So in the past, the canvass has dealt with provisional ballots and the ballots that have come in through the mail, and it's been a much smaller number that can be done in a half a day.
Is there such a thing as an absentee ballot anymore?
The mail-in ballots are the ballots. There's no real absentee ballot. You can ask for your ballot to be mailed to a different address. But the mail-in ballots are considered paper ballots.
All right. What do you do with ballots that come in with things crossed out on them? let's say, I mean, I'm not talking about insignificant things, an address or something like that. I'm talking about who you voted for.
We do get ballots with crossed out to, they voted for one person and then they decided no, they didn't want that person. They'll put a note on there. They didn't want it and then they'll vote for someone else. We call that the voter intent. It's a voter intent question. So voter intent questions, we'll separate that ballot and bring it to the board for the board members to decide what did we count on that ballot.
Okay.
So it'll be all three of us, and it needs to be a unanimous decision.
Are you going to talk about who can pick up the ballots and deposit them with the commission, or should I ask questions about that now?
You can
Ballot
ask a
harvesting
question.
is what I'm referring to. It's somewhat of a derogatory term, but
Well,
I think we,
one could say if you took your wife's ballot and put it in the drop box along with yours, that's technically ballot harvesting. So my understanding is there's nothing currently that prevents people from depositing multiple ballots.
That's
That's
correct.
correct.
We do not allow people to pick up ballots for their neighbors. We might get a call, you know, say, I want to go out and canvass the neighbor and pick up ballots. We say, nope,
well,
we can't tell you you can do that because we don't allow it.
I've got a pretty close relationship with a lot of folks who live in the Morris Blum high-rise in my ward. And I could see they're calling me to say, hey, Fred, we can't drop these off today. Can you come by, pick them up, and, drop them off? Or they're political operatives who, at least allegedly in some places, do that all day long. What's to stop somebody like that from changing the ballots they have, from...
Well, they would have to open the envelope and it would be tampered with. So it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Anne Arundel County.
But to answer your question, I mean, that does give accessibility to people that may not necessarily be able to get to in-person voting, even if they can't get somewhere to put in their mail-in voting. They can, that's different than also having somebody assist them with actually doing the voting. But if they've got a sealed ballot.
Well, that's kind of part of Harvard,
Right. Well,
ballot harvesting too.
You're right. Well, to give some other idea, I mean, in the last election too, with absentee ballots, we on our last day had somebody come in with 128 absentee ballot applications. And, that happened in the last election. I mean, now that didn't mean that those absentee ballots came in or that they filled them out, but they brought them in because people asked them to bring them in, and they
Well,
signed them.
Frankly, funny stuff with absentee ballots, Mr. Torrey, is why we got you involved.
That's
And-
right.
And
We run good elections in Anne Arundel County, and we'll continue to do that for you, 100%.
well, this was before you took over. There was some, shall we say,
I
irregularities.
remember that election. I remember reading it in the paper, and I went,
Oh, goodness.
Well,
Another question?
okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm assuming that the intent to this was because of COVID and because presumably there will be none next year or in the next election cycle for the city. This won't be a thing.
The actual intent for looking at mail-in voting was not COVID-19. It was looking at other jurisdictions that had success with it because it does increase accessibility and voter turnout and also satisfaction with voters. It kind of increased in terms of COVID-19, and we were still prepared for it because we don't know what's going to be happening in September or November. So the state board is prepared that if in-person voting needs to have precautions, it will have them.
A couple of other questions. Where would the efficiency be for the voter if they can't same-day register? So you'd still have to go through the process of registering, mailing in your application for registration, waiting for it to get back, waiting to get your card. And I was just under the impression that this was, like as you mentioned, to just increase voter turnout, make efficient for the voter, but I don't see that being the case. Just in
Well, if
this
someone hasn't
conversation.
registered to vote, we encourage them to do that, and they can do that online. If they need assistance or have questions, they can certainly call the County Board of Elections. We currently have almost 27,000 registered voters in the city. So we have I would think, a fairly high number.
You mentioned that previously you've had a significantly smaller amount of absentee ballots or provisionals that you've had to count, typically within a day and a half. Anticipating more ballots, will the committee be on a 24/7 counting schedule as we've seen in other jurisdictions when elections take place, or is this kind of at their leisure?
Well, as Mr. Torrey said, we're going to start on Wednesday, and they have the capability of processing, 10,000 ballots
Awesome.
in a
Okay.
day. So,
Which with 9,000 previous votes, you presumably could process every single vote if they were all mail-in a day.
right, and then we'd wait for any that came in afterwards. And the Board of Elections is committed. I mean, we have blocked out, we have to be up in Glen Burnie at the State Board offices at 5:30 on Election Day, and then we will be there the entire time for the canvassing.
So is there a fully assembled board now? I knew that there was issue with a move, and is this the full board in front of us, or?
No, it's myself and Brianna Cuffey. Brianna is on the West Coast due to work. And then we currently have a vacancy that is being looked at in terms of being filled. So there'll be three of us for the elections.
We're in the process of nominating somebody, I'm told, the Republican Party.
My understanding is that Hillary Radovich is taking care of that.
Yes, yep.
Okay. I also just in closing, just want to mention, with the polling locations, I know that previously there was some concern that we are going down to 8. Again, we're anticipating that there's going to be fewer people voting in person. I think in the last election, it was about 12% in the city of Annapolis that voted in person. All of the polling locations have been surveyed by the County Board of Elections, are ADA accessible, have parking, can handle the increased numbers that, more people going from two precincts. It also does help in terms of some cost effectiveness and also with finding election judges. And so we feel confident that it will be sufficient. We are prepared that if there are some difficulties or there are any problems, we have mechanisms in place that we will address them. But we feel very confident that this will be a good thing. It will provide consistency. All of these locations have been polling places before, are centrally located, and we even got the transportation maps out to see if we could make sure that they were as centrally located as possible.
Yeah, just to close, I do say thank you again. This does give me a lot of assurances that we'll have secure elections, and I hopefully give the public those assurances as well. And I do think this will help to make it more accessible to people. They can do either in-person voting, they can still do absentee, they can either mail in their ballot, they can also drop their ballot off at Dropbox. So we have plenty of ways for people to vote, and I think this will be good. And I also do, I am actually glad with having just one single polling place, because there was a lot of confusion in my ward last time about where to go.
Right.
So thank you all
Right.
for your work.
We
on
always
this.
worry that someone comes in and you tell them they're at the wrong polling place. Are they going to go to the other one? They can vote provisionally at that one, but sometimes people don't want to do that also. I do also just quickly want to mention the drop boxes are monitored 24/7 by cameras, and we've been able to work with the city of Annapolis to utilize cameras that mostly are all in place. So that's also helping in terms of the cost for this election.
Oh, I have a question.
Thank you. Alderman Gay, then Alderman Pindell-Charles, and Alderman Tierney.
Thanks. I did have a couple of other concerns, because to the alderman from Ward 2's point, if you are in a more disadvantaged community where there may be travel concerns with how to mail, etc., this was not disputed. So I'm saying theoretically, a individual could go around in a community understanding that ballots have been mailed out. I'm assuming when one ballot's out at least 1,500 are out. So people are going to be talking like, oh, I got my ballot, I got mine. Similar to a presidential election. Somebody could start on President Street, walk down Frederick Douglass, collect all the ballots, have them signed, flipped out, walk down Medgar Evers, have all the ballots signed, flipped out, walk down Madison, have all the ballots signed, flipped out, and I could take 300 ballots to the drop box and put them in. That is not illegal, is what I'm hearing.
Well, you have 300 people that are completing their individual ballots, correct? So there's 300 people that are voting.
So I just wanted to be clear, that is legal.
It's not legal, but usually that voter will call our office and
Right.
say, hey, my neighbor got a ballot, where's mine? So then what we do in the system, we do a reissue. So now we have 2 ballots out, and we know the first one and the second one have different codes on them.
Yeah, but
So we'll be able to catch it.
But are you saying one person is filling out the 300 ballots? Or
No,
they've
I'm
got
saying
300
like, you know,
people have done
we're in a
300?
community. We all realize, look, we got our ballots today, and we start to talk amongst as a community, and we're like, oh, okay, let's fill out our ballots.
Right.
Everybody
But we would
fills
hope
out their
that-
ballots, and they just give them to one person, and they drop them 300 ballots in the drop box.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But again, I want to stress, those are 300 individuals who have voted 300. So if we didn't count them, that would be unfortunate that their votes didn't count either. So,
That's a good strategy.
but, you know, there's also, you know, helplines. I mean, if people see something that they're concerned about, and this is something that the candidates can help us with, of getting that word out, to get registered, to change your addresses. You know, if you see something that's suspicious, there is a helpline that gets picked up immediately, and we have the ability to send people out. Every polling location has staff from the County Board of Elections. There's chief judges. They're very well trained, and we can deal with some, you know, irregularities if they're reported, and be looking on the lookout for them.
Thank you. Alderman Pindell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to go too far afield, but, or pose a question that's a little bit further in time, but I would assume next year with the 22 election that we'll have more than one polling place for each ward, possibly, or more drop boxes. You don't have to answer that because you're just trying to get through this election, I would assume, but because you're talking about more voters.
You're talking about 2022?
Talking to me.
That would be,
Yeah, I'm talking to Mr. Joe.
We've been told by the legislature we're going to have a regular election, so we'll have all the polling places open in Annapolis.
So can I assume, or I shouldn't assume, that we're going to go back to maybe 2 polling locations in each ward? Maybe not, maybe more drop boxes, maybe not?
I don't,
On the 22, it's
the 22,
it's
we
going to be
don't,
all of the Annapolis zip codes. So
Yeah.
it'll be in District 6 itself is 31 polling places?
yeah.
The reason I'm asking, and Ms. Leahy knows, is that we had a difficult time finding a second location in Ward 3. Finally, I got one. But that's why I'm asking if, for next year, is that going to be a concern?
As far as the city, your polling places in the city, you tell us what you want and we'll try to find them.
right, but
We'll find them for you.
But in the 2022, you're going to have accessibility in terms of the schools. We don't have that ability.
Okay.
The-
See,
All
there-
right. Then that answers
Right.
that question.
But I have, in anticipation of your question, what are the backup plans?
Okay,
And so, again, working with the county's been great because they have the procedures and the safeguards and the stopgaps to anticipate these types of things and you know, the training, not just of the judges, but particularly of the chief judges, on what procedures to do if things need to be moved, if things need to be shut down. It's not just electricity, it's car accidents, it could be anything. We pray that it doesn't happen, but we do feel very confident that we are prepared and we will be on the ground making decisions also.
okay. So the schools will be available. I hadn't even thought about that.
2022, yeah.
But thank you all for everything you do. It's a tough job, and I know a few years ago we came up to look at your location, and it's expansive and quite robust. what goes on in that building. But thank you all so very much, and for coming
We have the
today.
best building in the state, Anne Arundel County.
Might have the newest
County
one.
Executive Shu took care of us.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Alderman
Yes,
Tierney?
really quick. First, like Rob, thank you so much for your work and your due diligence and all of that. Eileen, you had mentioned something about transit, and I didn't read ahead to see where that was. I am concerned, on Bloomsbury Square, there's some people that will rely on transit or buses or just to go to City Hall, but that are disabled. And what was the transit thing you said?
At one of our meetings, we had all of the bus routes in front of us.
Okay.
And just tried to make sure that there's a bus route that
Okay.
comes near to every single
Okay.
polling location. And again, we pretty much knew that because all of these polling locations have been used before.
Sure. Okay.
There was talk about putting drop boxes in separate locations, but
Oh,
we didn't
right.
feel that that was necessarily going to help access. And again, we wanted to make sure that they could be located in places that would have 24/7 camera surveillance.
Okay.
So that's why they're going to be there, and they're in mostly public places. The challenge we have is just finding places that we can use. So the fire halls have been great, some of the churches, the larger churches that can accommodate. So we feel very confident with the 8 locations we have.
Great. Thank you.
And if we have problems, we'll know for the next time.
Thank you for your efforts.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? So I would like to thank you personally for your professionalism. We're very lucky to have you. I'm very proud of the work we do here in Maryland.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying the TV station educational videos that if any of you guys have seen them, they're really, really good.
They're really very
Mitchell
good.
and Julian put together. They're really, really concise, and I think they're fun. So
Yeah,
great job.
There'll be some more things going out. Brianna and Susan Eckert have been working with Mitchell on that, and so we'll be working a little bit more. We hadn't looked into doing some signage on the buses, but the cost may be a little prohibitive, so we're still looking at it, but playing with it a little bit more. So, all right. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
for all you do.
We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Right, Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
Yes, sir. The next item on the agenda is ID 163-21, Charter Review Commission.
All right, if you'd all like to come up from the Charter Commission, thank you so much. Whoever would like to come up. Got lots of seats up here if you want. Yeah.
Showing up.
Sure. Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, no worries.
We have it on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, for appointing us to the Charter Review Commission. My name is Andy Hare. I'll go into a little bit more detail about introductions in a moment, but today's presentation is the Commission's requirement for an interim report. You've asked for it, so today is the day we will provide the interim report. We'll provide you with a general overview of the work undertaken to date and a summary of the expected actions that will take place between now and the completion of our work on September 13th, when we will present the final report to you. We will also add that the Commission's work relies heavily, in part though, but heavily, on the Council's responsiveness and recommendations. The committee had its first meeting on the 9th of March of this year. We have met bi-weekly since. We have formed an executive committee that consists of a chair, which is myself, a vice chair, Mr. Paul Rankin, the secretary, Ms. Eileen Leahy, that meets in the intervening weeks. So the commission meets bi-weekly, the executive committee meets in the intervening weeks. Before I go on, I'd like to mention Paul Rankin, our vice chair, has a prior commitment and has to excuse himself at 4:30. So what we'd like to do is get through this as quickly as possible and then allow for at least an adequate amount of time for questions. One other thing about the schedule, which is important, is that the commission will meet on the 3rd of August for a half a day, where we will convene at Pip Moyer to try to solidify much of our thinking. Yes, we know that the final report is due in mid-September, but we believe we really do need to have a lot of our ideas grounded in the next 3 or so weeks. And then we will have the Pip Moyer meeting, as I said, on the 3rd of August. One of the things that we, or at least I personally discovered in this particular job, is that there was very, very little legacy background or foundation of what our job was. We really, other than the charter actually does say what the commission's supposed to do. So we initially had to organize ourselves and figure out how we were going to work. So we essentially, if you'll allow me to borrow the metaphor from the Chesapeake Bay, we essentially molted every single week. So we shed what we didn't want and we assumed what we needed. This is a remarkably, and I now speak personally, but a remarkably dedicated group that works very, very hard. I think, quite honestly, we've made significant progress in the 10 or so weeks, or the 10 or so meetings that we've had since the middle of March. Efforts to date, if I could ask you to at least follow the presentation that I handed out earlier, but the efforts to date is we've divided our work only because of the scope, the size of the scope of what we're looking at, essentially based on charter sections. There are 10 charter sections. So we have a series of subcommittees that are looking at a particular section. One of the things that we've done, and I've had the distinct, I'd actually honestly say the distinct pleasure and honor to actually meet many of you in terms of forming an outreach committee. And the outreach committee was essentially divided into 2 parts, if you will. One of the parts we would call the charter's fiduciary responsibility. Fiduciary meaning as in the term trust. The trustees of the charter really are you. They're what the public relies on to protect their interests. The other part that we look at are essentially the stakeholders, which would be the citizen associations and not so much the public, although we can get into how we have actually handled public response. But it deals with community groups and citizen associations and various interest groups that have an impact on the operation of the city. We've included, and this is the reason why I handed out individual copies, because I understand an earlier version did not have this, but we've included an addendum of the people that we've met. So if you look at page 5, those are the people that we've either contacted or met. We've actually met with quite a few people. Our end game, if I can steal from the chess metaphor, but our end game is how would we view an ideal charter? Not the one we have, but the one we'd like. So the end game is trying to get to a point where we have something that we can present you in the middle of September that's meaningful and hopefully impactful. We see ourselves as having a dual responsibility. And go back to emphasize what our remit was. We have the responsibility to you because the charter demands that. But we also expect you to help us, at least today, and even over the next 2+ months as we come to closure on this, to help us with that charter framework that we're actually putting together. In terms of setting tone, this is an important thing. I'm drawing a little bit from my professional background or my professional experience. And that is that we consider that we need to create a short preamble. And you'll see a copy of the overarching preamble for the entire charter in our appendix on page 5. But one of the things we would like to do is to create a preamble, if we can, for each section of the charter in an effort to underscore what we'll call continuity, integrity, visibility, and safeguards for the future evolution of the charter. And by that, what I mean is, if you can, from a legislative framework point of view, create an arc. This is the spirit, this is the philosophy that we would like the charter to have in a particular section. I'll get into the sections in a moment. Then what that does is it creates a bit of a culture in terms of what that intention of the section actually should be. What I'd like to do now is at least explain a little bit about our purpose. So this goes back over the last 10 or so commission meetings that we've had. But in the final report, what we would like to come up with is what we see needs improvement, why we see it needs improvement. I don't think it's important just to tell you what to do. We should give you our view in terms of why we think it's important. We also hope that such an adoption would actually bring what we'll call maybe a better city. We see today as an opportunity for constructive feedback, this is today, based on the comments during the section with both you and all of you. As we get closer to our final report, one of the jobs I see myself having is when we take an issue, we'd like to understand, why does it matter, how it works, what's needed to change it, what might the result be if it's changed. And probably the most important, and this is something, again, draws on my professional background, and that is, what's the outcome? What do we expect X number, 2, 3, 5 years from now, that if this gets changed, what would be the outcome that we would see? The report that you have in front of you has been divided as follows. We have the 10 sections that we have. We have some subpoints in each of these sections, but they're in no particular order. The sections are in the order that appear in the charter. But I have to give you a bit of a warning right now, and that is, I do not intend, or we do not intend, to read through each of this. I don't think it would be that valuable of use of time. But what we'd like to do is maybe go through the highlights of each section and at least give you some of our background. And we're fortunate enough to have 5 of us here that we could possibly share, when we get to the point of answering questions, we could possibly share some of the thinking to date. I think most of the heavy lifting, though, will happen between now and probably the middle of August. And then we'll spend between the middle of August and the middle of September finalizing the report that we give to you on the 13th of September. So with that, if I could just quickly go through the sections. Article 1 is a preamble. We have given you a copy of a draft preamble. And this, again, is much more philosophical. Article 2 deals with elections. And in the past discussion, we've had some good advice, good comments, actually, that we've heard about the kinds of areas that we should be looking at. One of our focuses will be on partisan versus nonpartisan elections, the workload of the supervisor of elections, and we heard this in the past review, and that is the alignment of the dates in terms of a state election and a city election. So those are the kinds of discussions that we've had to date. And again, those will be the kinds of topics that we'll cover when we have the final report. Article 3 deals with powers. I'd have to honestly say this is a terribly broad section. It demands not only clarity of language, and you'll hear that term quite a bit, because there's a lot of baggage that's calcified in the charter itself. But it's a terribly broad section where we will be seeking clarity. And we also noticed that in some parts of the charter, it's not relevant anymore. We are working with that, trying to figure out exactly what we should keep in and what we should not keep in. You can see the five areas in Article 3. Article 4 deals with some of you, except for the mayor. That's the city council. Once again, language clarity. We are examining the relationship between the council and the city's staff. We are examining how powers are defined. When we get to Article 5, which is the mayor, again, clarity of language, and also in the role of the mayor. So we are taking a very, hopefully a very measured and very paced look at not only what the views of the city and the commission might be, but we've examined jurisdiction throughout the state of Maryland. We've actually examined jurisdictions and model charters throughout the United States. So we're trying to get almost a best of breed, if we can actually get to that point. Article 6 deals with the operations of the city. Again, clarity of language. We felt that we see the city and the society that the charter is supposed to oversee is changing. But unfortunately, the charter seems to be at the figurative dock and is not, in fact, moving as society changes. We see specifics in such things as the engagement levels of the police. Now, we're not talking about how the police should be run. We're actually talking about what's the relationship? What is the job of the charter to actually form that? Definitions of roles of city employees and much, much more. When we get to Article 7, it talks about finance. And the things that we've discussed so far, and we have a fair amount of work already finished in this area, is examining the budgeting processes, the authorizations, the borrowing concepts, and so forth. When we get to personnel in Article 8, we start to question what we'll call relevance and clarity. If you will allow me to jump to the last, which is we have found priorities. This actually is an area, although we fondly call this priorities now, what we mean really is this is what's missing. This is what actually is not in the charter. And there have been two issues that we've spent a bit of time talking about so far, and one deals with cybersecurity and the other deals with housing. So with that, that is the conclusion of my prepared remarks. If I have, would you like to add anything now? We would open it up to questions.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you. Just looking at this, I'm really excited to see the final product from the commission. I really appreciate everything you've done, because I do agree with, I think, where you're going and the approach you've laid out. I think this is probably long overdue, really, in terms of the approach you're taking. Because the charter, even I've looked at the charter quite a bit, even as an elected official, but even before that, as when I was a city employee, and I think the charter does need to get, redone, because it needs to be that. I think it needs to be more of a guidance document for everything the city does, and I think the way it's written right now, it doesn't really serve as that. It doesn't really help to do that. And so I think what you've laid out will certainly help us in that regard. And I think if we can establish something like that, I think maybe we do want to look at requiring supermajority vote for changes to it, if it really can meet that purpose. So I think, as you've alluded to, there are things in the charter that really probably don't belong in there. I think there are a lot of opportunities to include things. Like I like a lot of the aspects of the charter's preamble, because again, I think that speaks to the way, at least I envision the charter operating. The election timing also, I think, could warrant certainly more discussion. Just to, I don't want to dwell on this issue, but just a few points on that. I think, at least for me personally, one of my concerns is establishing a timing where we're not going to be overshadowed, because it's one of the benefits that I've seen is having our election when there aren't any other local elections going on, such as county. We at least, some of the groups end up giving us some attention in terms of forums and coverage. And I think if we time the election with the federal elections, that might still allow us that opportunity because there aren't any other local elections going on. But I think to couple us with the county, we would still run that risk of being overshadowed. But yeah, I mean, look at, in terms of our last discussion, we've 25,000 eligible voters, about 10,000 of them actually vote. And that's not much. It's like average probably 1,000 people per ward. But the big issue the last big issue I wanted to mention, which again, I've brought up in the individual meetings, and thank you for reaching out, but is the kind of the separation of powers issue, because that I think needs a lot of clarification. And I don't know if you'd be proposing a different form of government, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, it might be worthwhile separating those discussions, because I think a discussion about a new form of government may be more difficult to have and may stop us from actually making clarifications to the code, to the charter in terms of separation of power. So I'd rather not see a discussion about the form of government get in the way of that discussion about clarifying our existing form of government. No matter, I know it certainly may have its concern, people may have their concerns about how it currently operates. And I say that because I think there's certainly some confusion about the role of the council, role of the mayor, and exactly what powers we do have. And I've just seen that in my experience get in the way of legislation. And again, it's really an unresolved dispute that I think really needs to be clarified for everybody's benefit. So definitely glad to see that that's mentioned throughout here. That's all for now. Thank you.
Monette, and then Alderman Finlayson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have to admit I've suffered along with you and watched all of your sessions. Sometimes I want to jump up and say, no, that's in the code, or things like that. But I do have a great deal of admiration for the work you're doing, the seriousness with which you're approaching this. And I have a very optimistic outlook for what we're going to get from this exercise. I also appreciate the fact that you're looking outside of Annapolis. What a thought. And going to how other people conduct their elections and how they set up their charter, and looking at some of the national organizations and the model charters and things like that. Those kinds of things are going to be helpful. They're not going to solve some of the things, and Alderman Savage just mentioned one of them, which is our form of government, which quite frankly, I've long thought was not a particularly productive form of government. Alderman Israel and I years ago pushed to go to a council manager form of government. I think now I'm more inclined to go to a form of government like the county, where you really do have true separation of branches, very strongly identified branches, and checks and balances. But we'll look forward to your recommendations on that. The one thing I found in the most recent meeting, which I find interesting, First of all, you had 3 people write in and make some comments. I'm glad that people are volunteering to do that. This whole notion of our committee form versus the form of committees at the county, I'm not sure either of them are particularly effective. In fact, I will confess, I've maybe been to 2 county council committees, committees of the whole. First of all, it's particularly with working members, it's hard to have a committee of the whole during the day. But I'm curious, and I'll watch to see what you come out, this train of thought that the committees are separating the elected officials from the constituents. And I didn't really see the follow-through on that thought, but be looking at that with a great deal of interest. I may have misinterpreted what I was hearing, but...
Yeah, I think what we were also talking about was not just the standing committees of the city council, but looking at the boards and commissions for the entire. I mean, there are currently 33 boards, commissions, committees, so it's looking at the whole enchilada, so to speak.
Well, and I think that is another topic, and I did talk with Paul about this. We have delegated from the council some extraordinarily important powers, particularly with land use, and I think we've in many ways been unfair to those boards and commissions and the expectations we have. We've given them tough decisions to make, and it's unreasonable, I think, to expect them to bring just sort of layperson expertise to bear. And I think we need to be looking for other ways to bring in some professionalism. That's why I've proposed the administrative hearing officer for the land use decisions. But we have, as you say, an awful lot of boards and commissions. I don't think we basically take whoever is willing to volunteer and are grateful to get them, just like we're grateful to have you do the work you're doing. But it is delegating to them some very serious things that have a big impact on the course of the city, not just in terms of land use, but in terms of environment, transportation. We have a transportation committee and a transportation board, and it's very hard to sort all of that out. And so in any event, I do want to let you know that I, for one, have been watching avidly with what you're doing. I appreciate it, and really do look forward to seeing the product that you come up with.
If I could just add one point to your first point, which was, and I may be making a leap that's not fair, but the division that we used in terms of our outreach, we did it the 2 different ways because we were asking different questions. When we talked to you, we were very keen about, and I think when I met with Fred and we talked about what did he like, or I'm not trying to put you on, what did you like or not like about the charter? Now, if you go to the public, they probably don't even know there's a charter. So it's just a question. So we tried to be as simple as we possibly could, or compartmentalized, not necessarily simple, but as compartmentalized as we possibly could with our questions. And Ben was terrific in terms of compartmentalizing that, so that when we got the feedback, we are getting quite a bit of feedback back. We then have it in easy buckets that we can start to put our mind around. Otherwise, it's random. But the 2 that I was talking about was, one, you being the fiduciary response. People trust you. We've given you our trust to run the city. Whereas when we talk to a citizens association, we may be looking at something completely different. What are your concerns? So I don't mean to belabor the point, but that's the reason why we divided it the way we divided it.
Thank you, Alderman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for the outline that you've provided and all the work that you're putting into this, because this truly is a monumental task. I guess my first ask of you would be to introduce the members of the committee that are before us.
Yes. Ron?
I've been a resident since 1990. I'm Ben Mednick. I grew up in Annapolis. I bought my own home here in 2004, so I guess you could say I'm a permanent resident since then.
And my name is Andy Hare. I am a resident of Annapolis for 3 years. I've lived all over the world, but I've been a Maryland resident for 55. So we've always had a house in Maryland. We moved from Montgomery County. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
And Eileen Leahy. So I've been here 36 years. And just want you to know that I am not on the working group for elections. I was like, fresh eyes and some other opinions. So it has been a pleasure to be on the group.
Good, and if you could speak into the microphone, and I might just get you guys to repeat after as well, because the microphone wasn't.
My name is Paul Rankin. I've followed Andy apparently up here from Montgomery County. I've been here for several years now, and but a lifelong resident of Maryland. And with that, I apologize that I have to go, but I wish I could stay here for the remainder of this. But thank you for allowing us to do this work.
I guess I asked that question in the right time then.
Thank you.
So thank you.
And
And I wasn't really asking for your credentials, but, we kind of like to address people that we're talking to, so thank you.
Yes.
Alderman Finlayson, they were just going to repeat because the microphone wasn't on, so Julian just needed to hear that again.
okay.
Sorry.
I thought maybe the cupola here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can put that in your report. Technology, not very good. Staff, excellent.
My name is Ben Metnick. I mentioned I grew up in Annapolis, but I purchased my home in 2000.
I think it might still.
Is your mic on?
Light on.
Is that better? Now I hear. I've been a resident since 2004.
Thank you.
Ron Schneider, I've been a resident in Murray Hill since 1990.
Well, thank you for that. You mentioned dividing into subcommittees. So are the representatives on each subcommittee carrying an expertise in a certain area, an interest in a certain area? How did that come about?
It's the latter. We divided to 8 subcommittees, even though there are 10 sections in the charter itself. I tried to categorize the key ones, and during one meeting, my objective was to try to get at least 2 commissioners on each of the 8. Now, all but the last mirror a chapter or a part of the charter. So the answer to your question is it was their interests, and it was very quick, believe it or not. The hands raised very quickly, and then, but I want to make sure we at least have 2. We have some that have 3 on it, but my concern was the scope of this commission was so big that, and it would be so random if we started to scatter, then we would get nothing done. And I think it has worked relatively well, where people have really taken ownership in, for example, finance, or in the city council, or in operations, and really dug into it. Paul, who unfortunately just left, he's the one who has actually talked to Hagerstown, has talked to Rockville, has talked to Tacoma Park, not just the city managers or the mayor of that, but the people that really have to do something in that. And I think we've learned a lot, especially with the discussion with Hagerstown. Eileen's been terrific in terms of looking at model charters elsewhere. State of Washington, there is a league, a civic league, I believe, it's about set to come out with a very good, with excellent ideas in terms of this is what a city charter should be. Now, our job is not to cut and paste. We don't have an interest in that, but it can generate ideas.
Well, and I appreciate that. As Alderman Arnett mentioned, we've investigated some options, for example, our form of government over the years, and have actually changed our form of government some years ago. So I was just interested in how those subcommittees were formed and what the impact would be of their expertise or opinion on those topics. My last question has to do with...
If I may, just
Sure.
one other thing. When we get to August 3rd, and I'm not so sure my fellow commissioners, we get to August 3rd, which is the work site, off-site effort that we're going to do, we're going to bring a lot of this group together. So it's no longer just the subcommittee. It's going to be all 9 of us with a lot of discussion in terms of views, but I'm going to task each of those subcommittees with a set of questions that are long, tough questions, hopefully, that they'll dig into between now and the 3rd of August. And when we get together on the 3rd of August, we'll have a lot more to work with.
So will that work session be public, or is it still virtual, or?
No, yes and yes. We understand it has to be public, based on the rules of the city. And it is in person. We will be there.
Okay.
Yes.
My last question has to do with reaching out to staff. You know, many of the areas that you mentioned in your presentation were areas that evolved over time. And so I wondered about how much, you mentioned, you know, going forward with this arc and not wanting to simply correct, and you didn't say it like this, but to correct what you saw was wrong. But my hope is that there will be an understanding of how we got to where we are, and thus what we should be doing differently moving forward.
I think if you look at the addendum, you'll see that this group has met with a number of department heads in an effort to do that.
Okay, I didn't see that in here.
Right, yeah,
but
so
okay,
if
that'll
you
be
get a
great.
chance to look at that, we've met with Jody Dickinson, Dr. Sally Nash, city attorney.
Is that in the document
city
you gave us
clerk.
today?
David Gerald?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's an addendum that looks like this, that lists all the people that we've actually done interviews with, and then also there's quite a few that we contacted too.
Okay.
It's page 5 of what
Okay,
I handed.
okay. Thank you very much, and again, thank you in advance for this humongous task.
I think page 5 is not in some of these packets. Yes.
Oh, was I next? Yeah. Thank you.
Then I'll
Thank,
begin.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I did want to commend you for your outreach. That's quite extensive, you know, to the community groups, et cetera. I was very intrigued. This is really speaking generally, and I'd like to hear a little, if you could, a little bit more about it, was your approach, Andy, specifically when you said, because I might be giving it too much credit, but I think your approach is a very unbiased approach, because what I heard was that you, and let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but when you said why, how, what, and then the outcome, it wasn't versus, you know, approaching it with an objective. Like, and I just thought that the way, am I not saying, you're shaking your head.
No, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right. We did not, or at least I think it's fair to say, we don't have an
Right.
agenda or an objective.
And that tells me that, because you're doing sort of this analytical approach, right? And you're looking and seeing, okay, you know, why does it say that? How does that done? What's the implication? And then what is the, you know, inevitable outcome? And so then from that, you have them, and I understand, and then from that, I can understand now that you have a preamble for each section, because you're basically framing that section of the charter. So in my view, it really eliminates any bias. That's all I'm going, you know, it isn't like you say, okay, form of government, let's look at it this way. You come to that conclusion a different way. Is that fair to say?
I think it is. And I think my initial reaction, a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, when I read the 2011 report of the Charter Commission was just that. They saw essentially something that was wrong. It was like a hangnail that they wanted to clip off. And here's the fix.
Right.
I said, we have far too many talented people on this commission.
Right, yeah.
That why not look at this far more objectively? And that's why, and I know Ben has a lot of interesting thoughts in terms of that arc, that preamble that we're trying to get. I don't want to belabor the point, but I created legislation for a country. And one of the points that I did was, I was asked, what are your principles? And I had been in the economic sector that I worked in for 20 years, and I could not answer the question. Something as simple as, what are your philosophies and principles? Went off for 2 weeks with the smartest people in the room, came back. In the very first piece of this legislation, it's on the internet, it's the law. There are the 10 principles that we're going to guide ourselves by. It's not legally binding, but it's the principles. They're always brought out. If somebody violates the law, we say, Principle 6 is you have to be neutral with your decisions. And I felt it was the most powerful thing that I did in the creation of that legislation. And I don't know whether we'll achieve the same thing here. We do have, I think, a very good preamble. I think it's a draft, though.
Right.
The preamble is a first start. We'd love to get further input from you. We felt that it was so important that we look at, especially in today's times, we look at diversity, we look at inclusivity, we look at climate change. My God, you brought this up. This is basically a coastal city.
Oh, you mean you got rid of the horse and buggies or whatever that says?
Well, actually, there's for those that want to have a little entertainment in the charter. Maybe you know this, but in the charter itself, there is something on the size of grain,
Right. About oats.
the size of bread.
Oats. Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. The oats.
But Ben has been very good in terms of trying to get us focused in terms of that, what I'll call, it's my word, not necessarily his, that arc.
Yeah.
In terms, where should this be? So future councils can come back and look at this and they said, here's what somebody said at one point in time that the arc ought to be.
Yeah.
It's not the rule itself. It's not I tend to think the charter is a set of guardrails. I think actually you would mention that in terms of that's really what the charter should be, is essentially stay on the road.
Yeah, that's a good
It's not telling you how to drive or how fast to drive. The code will tell you that. But what it is, stay on the darn road.
Right.
And so the arc would be stay on the road.
Right. Well, congratulations. I know this part is like 70% of the effort is to get to this point, so.
Do you want to speak at all to the issue of, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Yeah.
I just say that there's a timeliness to this as well that I think is unique. We've all lived through sort of events in the last 2 years that the commission 10 years ago could never have foreseen. Everything from pandemic to sort of societal, polemics, if you will. And what Andy's talking about with the preambles and the arc, and just tying that to the concept of objectivity, and also, Alderman, to your concern about background and credentials. The idea is to make the charter useful 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, without us even knowing what that could possibly mean, if you understand what I'm trying to say. I have my suspicions what it might mean, but my guess is as good as yours. Being a coastal town, I suspect that we'll be dealing more and more with environmental issues. Having gone through what we went through with the pandemic, I suspect we'll be dealing more with health issues. Having gone through what we went through with the last election cycle, I suspect we'll be dealing with voting issues and expansion of the franchise. We're not here to tell you guys what it will be, and it's certainly, as volunteers, not our role to tell you we need you to vote it into place. But we hope that we can all agree on a vision, if you will, that would be codified in these preambles, that a future council would say, how do we deal with these issues as the city of Annapolis? I would throw in there also cyber crime, which popped up in the middle of our project. So.
Thank you, Alderman Pindell-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm listening to you.
Sorry.
And it sounds like a conversation 300 or so years ago that the founding fathers might have had. That's what it sounds like. that it's a ever-evolving, fluid document. Who would have ever known what due process was until Thurgood Marshall came along and defined it in Brown v. Board of Education? Nobody would have ever thought that 200 and something years ago. So that's the conversation I'm hearing from you. Am I right or not? Or
I hope you're right. That's my goal.
yeah,
That is
that's
my
what it
goal.
sounds like. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for all the
I'm
work.
a real fan of the Federalist Papers. I've read them all, and I've started to reread them. I think the Federalist Papers are a very powerful document to understand the United States.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you all. It's been a humongous task, but we thank you for your dedication.
Thank you.
Alderman Gay, sorry about that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Do you know how many Federalist Papers Alexander Hamilton wrote?
Yes, I do. I did. Let me put it differently. I know you wrote the most.
Yes, 85.
Yes.
He wrote 85. He wrote the most. I'm a huge fan as well. I've read the book. I haven't read it multiple times, though. I had a number of questions. The first, I see in miscellaneous, it says diversity. Revise the Charter Revision Commission provision to include award diversity requirement. I greatly appreciate seeing that in here. Obviously, having a number of these work sessions before us, not just this one, but whether it be task force, commissions, or whatever, diversity is almost never there, and partly because of social challenges. So how can you codify diversity requirements within individual commissions when there are so many social challenges that prohibit maybe some of the people that we would want to go after from contributing to groups and organizations like this? Transportation, lack of childcare, not able to take off of work, to attend morning or evening meetings as such. How do you work to meet a goal like that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was the one that volunteered for Article 9, so I'll take that one on.
This is our
It
subcommittee.
It is not our role to address the code, and we're certainly not a community organization either. We're a volunteer commission whose purpose is to review the charter. Now, the idea of diversity in Article 9 was specific to all these, the Charter Commission specifically, which is formed every 10 years. But I think it could be applied to any board or commission in the city if a board and commission structure or committee structure is the form of governance that this city council would wish to continue with. That's not for me to say. But within that, diversity is incredibly important. And to me, the simple and the achievable are better than the perfect. The short answer would be, for instance, on this charter commission, there should never be a charter commission again that doesn't have 8 members at a minimum from each ward. Are you going to get somebody from each ward to volunteer? And to your point, Alderman, is someone from a particular ward going to be able to physically get there? I can't answer that. But I do think that the way you can deal with it is to have minimums. So we may say that the ideal is to have total ward representation on the next charter commission in 10 years, but at a minimum, there must be at least 5 or 4 or 6. I mean, these are things that we can discuss. I believe this commission that you're looking at represents 3.
Yeah, there's 3 wards, 8 men and 1 woman. As we've looked at it, we've also looked in terms of diversity beyond ethnicity, but also looking at gender, age, socioeconomic, and ward location.
Right. So the short of it is it all comes down to standards and thresholds, I guess is my opinion. Now, once those standards and thresholds are established, and the goal of this commission is to broaden those, we should have a wider participation in this commission and potentially others. How that happens, that's your guys' issues as well as,
As I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, maybe the code should discuss possible financial incentives or, to the point, I think diversity is much more than just obviously the ethnicity of one's background or racial demographic. I think there's so many other, and particularly in this city, and particularly in these processes where someone with a different socioeconomic background could see a different lens to the city code and offer alternatives. So, but I appreciate you definitely for having that in there. I think that's really important. I also agree and appreciate the City Council separation of powers, clarification on separation of powers, define the limitations on, so on, further clarify how an older person may direct a city employee or communicate with them. I think that's critically important. It's been a discussion amongst the council a number of times as it relates to our interaction with staff and requests and operations and so on. I agree with it as well as for the mayor considering other governance. I have spoke with Alderman Arnett on multiple occasions about how I desperately think we need a new form of city government. It's not effective in its current rate, where there is a lack of communication between the true executive, the executive's attorney, and the executive's director, who in this case would communicate between the staff and the directors. It's just not effective. It's not. And it always boils down to a lack of communication or follow through. So I completely agree. And trust. Yes, I completely agree with that. I agree with the ideas where a majority could remove as a city attorney. I think that is important. As noted, we don't really have any, or we as a body of city councilors, excluding the mayor, we don't have control over what the city attorney does or does not do. And I think that if the mayor hires him and it works to his benefit, why would the mayor fire him? And so there should be room for communication amongst the council and our ability to hold those authorities with directors and the city manager as well, and the assistants, because there's two assistants underneath for him. And so maybe clarification there, and who can hire and fire the assistant city attorneys and so on. I think what you guys have put together is a very, very good start, and it touches on some of the really important conversations, discussions, and true challenges that I think I've seen just through my lens in my short 2.5 years here. And so I look forward to seeing the continued work, but you guys are right in the right place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Arnett and Alderman Finlayson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Hare, I was really struck by your comments on needing to think about the principles when you were doing that. And I'm not sure whether you would see principles as the same as mission and vision, but I've always been struck that the council doesn't have a mission and vision statement. And in fact, the city hardly has one. There was one developed in 2012 with some strategic planning, but it was never really fully adopted. And that strategic plan document, by the way, if you haven't seen it, is a pretty good document that I would encourage you to look at. But I'm wondering, I was looking at your draft preamble, and it does feel to me like that is a place where core principles or mission and vision could be captured. I think there are a lot of the essence of that in here. You may have to kind of search for it or rearrange it to come up with that. But I think that is something that makes it hard for us to govern together, because we're not all necessarily going in the same direction. And sometimes we're quite clearly looking very myopically at our ward and the things we want for our ward, which is not, it's sort of divisive rather than unifying. So I really like that you brought that up about principles. It's something I've thought about a lot. Another thing that I've thought about is the core values of the city, and I've done a lot of work, and I can share that with you. I worked very hard on coming up with a set of core values. I shared it with Will Rao, and he and I were going to get into a robust discussion on that. But those are sort of the fundamental touchstones of making a city work, I think. So I'm just throwing those out, and I will try to get you, I can send you all the core values that I worked on. It was in 2 administrations ago, actually, or maybe even 3. Might have been under Ellen Moyer. The other thing that I was struck with in listening to your work sessions is discussion about the size of the city. And that's something that Alderman Budge and I talked about a long time ago, several years ago at MML. I asked Joe, what wards do you think are the core city of Annapolis and what wards are not? And I don't know whether the city is too big or too small, but it is very diverse, and very diverse not just in terms of socioeconomic things, but just diverse in the kind of neighborhoods we have. And it's hard to figure out where the real boundaries are for you should be in the city versus being in the county. So I hope there'll be some reporting on that when you get your work done about size of the city. That's not something we often talk about here at this body. But anyway, getting back to the principles and the core values and mission and vision, and whether that is something that should be right in the preamble to the charter, which is the beginning of our governance, I think is something I would certainly ask you to think about.
If I may, the key is that the draft that we've shared with you will actually be the overarching umbrella for the whole charter. So that's actually the spirit, if you will. That's I keep on using the word arc, but it's going to be the fabric of the whole charter, and quite frankly, should be the fabric of the city. Then the next thing, which is what Ben was talking about, was a little more granular, because then we would have X number of sections, if you will, on powers or city council or the mayor or what have you. And this is what we've had a lot of debate on, because I don't know whether we can achieve this or not. And that is that there will be a preamble for each of those. So then there's the arc of what is, and again, I don't know whether we'll have the time and the bandwidth to get there. We all have views on it, but what should be the overarching mood, if you will, of the city council? And it's not, Ben said it very well. We can't and won't and shouldn't tell you what to do, because that's not our job. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, here are those guardrails that we're, and just to your point on the principles, you could not believe, I had to execute that law. Once I actually drafted it, it was my job to actually run that portion of the sector. It made my job so easy. And I've told people around the world, in terms of, once you know the principles, your job becomes breathtakingly easy. It's just, everything comes in. It's like thousands of rounds of ammunition are coming, but you've got the principles and you can actually do your job. You don't even have to almost think. You can go on autopilot and do your job very well. Thank you, Annie, for your comments.
Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Gay, then Alderman Savage.
Well, I'm going to give you an award if you can codify between this group of 9 a vision statement and a mission statement. We have tried, and we have hired consultants who have tried, and as you can see, with little success. And so maybe that's part of, and we know that that's one of the things that we are lacking, because we all are going much of the time in different directions. I think, well, I guess one of my questions, I only have one question, it has to do with the diversity piece. It's very clear that in the city we have 3 minority wards. So are you talking about, or will you be addressing the boundaries and making recommendations or codifying those boundaries as best you can outside of what's done during the census, of course? But will you be making sure that our boundaries are equal, so that when we talk about the heart of the city, there's a piece of the heart of the city in every single ward. It's not all downtown, or it's not all Eastport. You know, it's not all in one place, but that feel is shared throughout the entire city. So that is a question. I know it's a long.
You're throwing that one in there.
Well, I mean,
Go
I
ahead.
think if there is a commission that's doing that, that's looking at ward boundaries, there has been some discussion, at least in the interviews that I've had with people, which kind of goes back to what Alderman Arnett was saying about the size of the city. Should we just be one big ward? Should we be 5 wards? You know, so it's something that's under discussion, but in terms of actually codifying it or doing that, I don't see that necessarily as our purview as such. We could
Okay.
certainly look at it a little bit more, but.
Okay, I was looking at your Article 9, so that's not what that was referring to when it speaks to the 3 wards.
No. So to clarify, in Article 9, it specifically mentions our commission, the Charter Revision Commission. We're using that as a launching pad, if you will, since it's already in the charter, as to what I'll say a general concept of diversity might mean. And I think, again, going back to the point of simple and possible, as it relates to the charter and this commission, I believe that that's the ward structure. Okay? So as an example, today, on this year's commission, like I said, there's only 3 wards that are represented in an 8-ward city. That's kind of crazy when the task is to rewrite the charter of the city, if you will, or provide recommendations for the charter of the city. The idea is that the next charter commission would emblemate diversity through some type of ward minimum requirement, that there must be at least 5 of 8 wards represented, if not 8 of 8 wards represented. That's a very simplistic model. If that model works for this commission, my thought would be, why couldn't similar models work for other commissions if you want to use the commission model of governance, if you will. So.
And I've talked with Hillary in regards to looking at boards and commissions and how that can be achieved. But it also falls in terms, for lack of better things, responsibility of the council. For instance, if, you know, I'll go out there, I'll go there. This commission was to be made up from city council recommendations. And here we are, and we're not diverse. We're not a diverse group. And so it's going to take all of us. And again, it's looking at diversity through different eyes and in different places and looking at it differently. It is more than just ethnicity, racial, gender, age. It's all of it. And so I think one of the things that the commission is trying to do is put it out there and just say, we need to be paying more attention to this. And it needs to filter throughout all of it starts with the charter and then it can filter out into the code.
Well, one of my documents did not have the addendum. I did find it. It was in the other
There
one.
seems to be 2 different versions of the
Yes.
handouts. If someone doesn't have it, we'll be sure to get it to you.
And so I do see the city staff who were interviewed. I, however, was not. And Alderman Gay was not. And so I don't know what the next step is, but I would like to be included. Yes, and
Can we set a date right now?
Yeah, absolutely, we can.
Wonderful,
And there
wonderful.
are communities within my ward that I would like to see represented. You know, we had Ms. Raftovich create, we didn't direct it, maybe the mayor directed her, to create a list of all the communities and associations within our wards. It's on the city website because I found it. And so, you know, there is a list out there, but
This is based on that list. And it doesn't include everybody because we
Okay.
couldn't include everybody. So what we tried to do is to pick 2 from each ward that try to represent some diversity. We try to identify community leaders in each one of those. But that list was the basis, and then with talking with others. We have tried to reach out to a number of people, the city council and other leaders, and say, we're happy to talk with you. So we're still happy to interview people and talk. If you have other people that you want to have us talk with, we're happy to. I'll be honest, in terms of my experience, I have sent numerous emails to many of the ones that are listed and have not heard anything back, which has
Okay.
surprised me. Even in my own ward, I haven't gotten anything back after sending 2 and 3 responses saying, hey, can we even talk on the phone? So anything you can help us with, that would be great.
I would be glad to do that, and I would be glad to schedule my interview.
And Alderman Finlayson, can you guys set this up afterwards, and then Alderman Gay, if you haven't had a chance? Yeah. I was going to say that because we have a hard stop because Cindy has to get out of here at 5, so it is 5. So Alderman Gay and Alderman Savage have 2 quick questions, but you could also set up your meeting.
Yeah, I'm fine with setting it up later. I'll even get you, because there are tenant associations from Hacker Properties that weren't here, so I'll set that up. Couple of quick things really quick. I told you the wrong thing. There are 85 total essays. John Jay wrote 6, James Madison wrote 29, Hamilton wrote 51. How could I forget?
I thought I was about to say
Yes.
51, and then you said 85.
I was thinking of the total essays, 51. I'm a huge fan of Hamilton, seen it a number of times. Love it. Quickly though, she's touched on a point where we can set up, but there is in priorities, found priorities at the end, review the requirements to address the housing authority of the city of Annapolis in the planning and zoning section of the charter. What could you expand on that, or what possible recommendations could be made as it relates to the responsibilities the city has with HACA?
This is in the last?
Yes, on page, I'm sorry, page 4, I'm sorry.
This one right here, Article Nova, it's the new edition.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes.
Issue number 2.
This particular, this is new ground because the charter is silent on housing. And so the job of this was to explore more deeply, whether this would be one of the recommendations we have, that this really should be elevated into the charter, the concept of housing. I think we have to be careful because I run under a kind of a governmental philosophy that governments really are responsible for 5 areas, housing being one. But I don't want to get too far afield. But transport, for example, is one. Education, medicine, food. Those are essentially the 5 pillars of, City of Annapolis is not responsible for food, but usually governments are. They are responsible for those 5 things. Housing, I think, is an important one. We've talked about it, I would say, of the 10 sessions we've had, maybe 3 times. So it's been raised. And again, if you've watched, it's been raised each of the 3 times. I will take away from this particular meeting today to dig deeper into this and to make sure that when we get to our August 3rd meeting, we've got more definition and concrete on that particular area. Whether it actually makes it into our final recommendation, I can't promise that today, but I can promise you that we will spend a lot of time looking at, we'll look at actually every single thing that's in front of you.
I'd love to be a part of that conversation because as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that the code says about HAC is that the mayor makes a recommendation and the council appoints the board people, and that's about it. No other rules or regulations into how the relationship should operate. And so I would love to be a part of that and see where that goes. Thank you again.
Thank you. And Alderman Savage, quick one.
Yeah, just quick on the standing committee. I do think, I look forward to seeing your comments on the standing committees process, because I think when it works well, they really do help us out. Because as part-time legislators, the standing committees do help to kind of separate some of the responsibilities and focus. And that's helpful for those of us who do have day jobs and can't attend long meetings as frequently. So I think the one challenge that could be worked into the charter would be working in a better reporting requirement where the committees have a set time and task to really report back on exactly what their findings are during the deliberation for legislation.
I agree with Alderman Savage about the standing committees. They are extremely helpful, especially those of us who work full-time.
Well, we truly appreciate, we're so lucky to have you, so thank you so much. We can see your commitment to this. So.
Thank you.
Thank you
Just to
again.
let you know what, Rob Tufts, Lawrence Harris, Jeff Durand, and I'm missing, and Carter Minor Carter, I'm sorry, are also on the group. If anyone doesn't have the addendum, I'm happy to give you one.
And then
If
you
you've
guys
got
are
an
just going to
email.
follow up. You guys are going to follow up with your meetings, right?
Yeah.
These guys, great. So, okay, thank you so much. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item.
The agenda is complete, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anything else for good order, City Council?
I move that we
Okay,
adjourn.
meeting adjourned.
Aye.
Aye.